So today there isn't a flipped classroom segment. Right, today is week 6, as you saw. The course schedule has it that today we are doing hybrid, so people are on YouTube Live, people are also here in class. Most of you are here in class. And next week, we'll resume our flipped classroom segment over on Zoom, right? So you will have your usual debates. So again, after today, either most likely tomorrow, right, I will release the motion. So everybody has 1 week to prepare. And then the debating teams, you know who you are. Tell me your preference, whether you prefer the proposition or the opposition. And if both teams so prefer the same side, then I would toss a coin. So last week I tossed a coin, both sides preferred the same side, and then I assigned accordingly. So you have to trust my honesty on that. I didn't like one team or somebody in this team over another, right? It may not be something that you find natural, that side. Still, for your learning and for everyone else's audience learning, it does take preparation whether you're on both sides, regardless of which side you're on. So here, okay, let's see, we have almost everybody here in class. We would have kind of 2 segments today. The first part on critical gerontology, the second part on public policy. Right here in the critical gerontology part is more me talking and you responding a little bit, discussing a bit. In the second part, in the public policy part, you get to do a bit more hands-on in your own teams, in your own groups of 5 or less if there are teammates who are at home. So in the second half, which will happen after the break, I will ask you to sit in your own teams. Now, wherever you're seated, that's fine. You can just stay where you are. No problem about that, right? Okay, so I'm glad everybody made it to the to this place, right? Right place at the right time. Okay, let's see what we have today. Okay, we are now at week 6. That means we have covered 5 weeks of the course. The first 5 weeks of the course really tried to nurture or inculcate the learning outcomes listed. They're just the first and the second, really. The biopsychosocial factors for human aging and the behavioral processes. These are 2 words, biopsychosocial and behavioral. These are words used in the textbook, right? So the textbook, among the various chapters, are kind of segregated into kind of sections, right? So we have covered those. Obviously, I couldn't cover every chapter in the textbook that goes under biopsychosocial and goes under behavioral. I just can't because we just don't have time. We only have 13 weeks and we need to get you involved in assignments as well, not just me talking and you reading and that's about it. So today we will begin number 3, more complex psychological processes. And if I'm not wrong, next week is informal caregiving. Is that right on the schedule? That will be week 7. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember the entire schedule by heart. Or is it work retirement? I forgot. Informal work retirement? Okay, thank you very much. Then the following week then. No worries. So that'll be number 4 there. And then you would see that towards the end of the entire semester, I think week about 10, 11, you will see interventions, sleep interventions, mood and anxiety disorders interventions. So that would be number 4 as well. Number 5 over there really is your project. Demonstrate. That means you doing something, you showing yourself, showing me at least that you're able to do some form of advocacy that address aging issues by crafting a digital media piece, right? And which is your project, right? And then number 6, continue on. And then it's really a reflective journal, right? Your own peculiar, personal, may even be very subjective beliefs, thoughts, attitudes, experiences, encounters that I say many times that I'm looking for in the journal, kind of your own conceptualization, your own putting things together beyond textbook factual knowledge, beyond what do you call that? Content that is taught to you didactically or one directionally via me verbally or via the textbook in print, right? but your own thinking that put maybe one or two things together, but of course centered around debate topics. So we have had uh, accessible debates last week. That was one debate that the teams were assessed. We also had debates earlier than last week, right? The warm-ups, what we call the warm-ups. Those are topics, or I should say, those are opportunities in which you could take reflection on. You could have reflection on. So, say last week's topic, better age with a spouse, right? If you're in a debating team, I'm sure you must have thought a lot more about it than perhaps others. So I believe you will have something to write about that. If you're not in the debating team, right? For instance, right, you would have heard either side argue their point, one or more points, and you may kind of side with the point. You may find yourself kind of standing on this side or that side, or you may find yourself changing a stance, right? You might find one or more issues or examples being brought up by either teams last week, for instance, something that you could personally relate to because you had one or more encounters of a similar nature. You may have one or more personal experiences or personal relationships, associations that kind of were kind of described or brought up as examples. Not just last week, then, if you extend it, then also the weeks before in the various other topics. So these are things that these are things that you can bring up and to say something about, say, uh, if you want to say something about last week's topic, better age with your spouse, you could in your own words. I agree, I disagree, that's simple. But you can go beyond that. You can say, look, I very much see this as a, say, two-sided. I agree both sides. I very much say that I very much see that well, there's not whether spouse or not has nothing to do with age, or whether aging or not has nothing to do with marital relationship or spousal relationship. Or better still, I very much remember one point that I very much personally like the idea that perhaps today in today's well, I don't know what we call the age we live in. In today's context, perhaps the idea of spouse is different from the idea of spouse 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? Because perhaps spouse 20 years ago, 10 years ago was just a marital relationship, right? Today, right, the idea of spouse, right, with all the various cultures and subcultures that you know of, right, could really translate into many things, right, which were mentioned last week, right? So which you could think about, could write about, and then say how it's related to aging. It has to be related to aging somehow, right? And say perhaps how you plan. Okay, what intrigued you, what interests you, and how you wish to perhaps take that idea or take that point forward, or investigate or ask more and find out more about which point. So that is something. These are just different pointers I can say for people who are still curious about how to write, what to write. I had a question on whether there is supposed to be more scope or depth. I would say more depth, more depth, more deep writing than covering everything we've covered so far. I would say, right? I also got a question on whether you could write on any other topic that we've covered so far. I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that anything that has been brought up in the debates, right, you can write about. Anything that hasn't, don't write about it. So that's the no part, right? So my intention is to keep you focused and for the assessment to be fair. I mean, we're kind of comparing apples and apples, not with oranges. So everybody kind of just limit your coverage to any one or more aspect or issue or example or point that has arisen in the debates so far, including the warm-up debates. They were not assessed, right? So I think that's all I think I could really say. I want to ask if there are any questions. I want to take this chance to address any on the reflexive journal. I know the deadline is not yet. I know questions are bound to come as you try to as you attempt. I already have email queries, but I'm happy to answer them even earlier if you have any. Now, anybody on the YouTube? Yeah. Somebody asked me, can you teach psychosocial model briefly? Okay, I might be able to touch a little bit, Sam, on that as part of today. But today's topic isn't really on psychosocial model. Sorry about it. Yeah. Um, Right. Yeah. Well, on YouTube, well, anyone could view this lecture. So most of the time, the camera is focused on me. So I hope you have no privacy issues. If there's any one of you who don't feel comfortable, appearing half your face, just your eyes and your body, our back view, camera, please let me know so I'll be extra sensitive on where I turn the camera, right? On our face-to-face sessions, right? Like, you can let me know in private or write email to me. Other people don't have to know if that is, right? If that applies to you, right? I'll respect that, right? Any questions on reflective journals? No? Okay. So, oh yes, I should also say that on our course site, I have already uploaded an instruction kind of sheet on reflective journals. Assessment criteria is there. Really, nothing beyond what I have spoken in class, whether online or right now in person, right? Yeah. So you could take a read. Also, there are 3 samples of journals that have been written in the past semester, which you might find useful. Except one thing I should say: in the past semester, I didn't require students to limit their topic to debates, so they wrote about anything. Right. So now I realize to be fairer, based on feedback, and also to kind of help everyone be focused, is now on debates. Yeah. Okay. If not, we should move on. Okay. All right. Let's begin. Introduction is a blank. Yeah. Really, I don't really need this slide, except this. Um, okay. I'm going to show you something on the screen. So hang on, whatever you're doing. No need to look at your own computers. No need to look at lecture slides now. Look at the screen. Pay attention to what's going to appear in the screen, on the screen. Right. I'm going to show you something. Now, before that, I want to warn you. That if you are of the sensitive nature, right, at that point, after I say 1, 2, 3, you can look away briefly before you look. Right. If not, that's fine. Right. It possibly can cause memory loss, fatigue, poor vision. Let me see what I have on the list. Lasting psychological damage, and perhaps even difficulty walking. Oh, somebody has a guess. Who wants to guess what I'm going to show? It possibly can cause, hopefully it doesn't cause you all these. It possibly can. That's what I'm saying. Don't worry, I won't directly cause it. Okay, so get ready. Right, if you are of a sensitive nature, okay, you can look away now at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Right. Why am I showing you this birthday card? Does it look like a birthday card, by the way? No, it doesn't. I heard no. Okay. What does it look like? So, yeah, anybody? Yeah. Okay, to me, it's a birthday card. You see, let me tell you a story. Right? This is how I think I'll begin the topic, and which also explains to you why I'm showing you this and how this might cause all the damages they have listed earlier. Right? It was in 2007, this story, right, in Jackson, Mississippi, a 27-year-old man known as let's call him Mr. A. So he was suffering from depression. You know depression, right? You all know that. Right? So he decided to enroll in a clinical trial for a drug, which might help him, right, cure his depression, so to speak. So he was given a bottle of pills and told to take one a day. Right? Unfortunately, the days passed. He followed instructions. His depression didn't go away. He was fed up. At one point, he was so down, he took all the remaining pills he had, 29 of them, 29 times his usual dose. Luckily for him, he immediately regretted his decision and he rushed to a hospital and had himself admitted. The doctor checked him, essentially did his various vitals, and found that his BP, his blood pressure was really serious. It has plummeted, and he basically, in fact, collapsed at the reception of the emergency department. The on-duty doctor gave him fluids, intravenous fluids on the IV, while he began a series of tests, and they couldn't, unfortunately, find any traces of any drugs in his physical system, in his body. right? Now, have an intelligent guess. What happened? That's right, the control. It turns out that he has ingested 29 sugar pills. So not the active ingredient that was tested by the pharmaceuticals, right? But the thing is this though, after he heard that news that he ingested sugar pills, he immediately felt better. His blood pressure went back to normal. Everything went back to normal. But not before that. Interesting? Now, this illustrates an effect called that's right, the opposite of the placebo is called the nocebo effect. So the placebo effect is an expectancy, an expectation of something desirable, and in fact, making that expectation making or leading to that desirability or the desirable event occurring, right? That's placebo. So I believe this drug will work, even though it's a sugar pill, it works. Turn it around, the nocebo effect. These are negative preconceptions that increase the adverse effects and symptoms experienced. So I believe something doesn't work, it doesn't. In fact, I believe something is detrimental to me, it becomes bad for me. That's the nocebo effect, right? And you can read there negative expectations, sensation, stress, da da da. Now, the thing is, this is not something that is hearsay. It is actually shown in scientific literature with clinical drug trial placebos that antidepressants, among all the various antidepressants, right? If you have taken clinical psychology, you know there are three main types of antidepressants. Like, who remembers those? Three classes. They each have acronyms. Yes, SSRIs. What does that stand for? That's right. Thank you very much. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Two more. Benzodiazepines. Exactly. Thank you very much. And one older type of the antidepressants called the MAOs. I forgot what it stands for. Anyway, right? But essentially, nocebo effect has been found, right? Proven, you can say, in a clinical trial, unintentionally. Right? So this is something you can read up. You can. I have the slides for you, and you can go find this out. So in 2015, there were 900 million people over the age of 60. That's enough centenarians in 2015 to populate Iceland. Right? You know where Iceland is? Well, it's bigger than Singapore for sure, right? And unfortunately, we have been told often that if you look at at this aging phenomenon from a public health and from a societal perspective, we've been told that this is going to be a time bomb, a tsunami, right? These are words used to describe aging, right? Have we come across in the public literature and public domain something more positive than that? Like aging is happening, yay. No, right? You can think about, right, in various other industry, various other phenomena that people may associate something more desirable, more positive, more uplifting, right, than time bomb, tsunami, than a problem to be fixed, right? Okay. I have asked you in the first section to type geropsychology in MS Office, right? Now, turn on your MS Office, Word, Excel, or PowerPoint. Let's now type the word old. It will not be a spelling error, right? Old is an English word, but type it in. You will not see the red wavy line, but type in on Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Let's type in the word old and then go to thesaurus. So you can right click and then there'll be words that come, or you can find, I think, spell check and then you get thesaurus. Look for synonyms, words of the similar meaning, and just shout out to the whole class, to me, what words emerge there. Anybody? Yes, yes. Sorry? Ancient. Thank you. What other words? Old fashioned, yes. Any other words here? Yep. Any other words? Sorry, I didn't catch that. From here. Yeah. Prehistoric. Thank you very much. On MS Word, yeah? Or PowerPoint, Excel. Which one? Google. Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay. All right. Other people. Those who have MS Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Yeah. What do you have on thesaurus? Over the hill. Thank you. Others? Long forgotten. Thank you very much. Right. Any other words? Okay. I did my own homework and I got these words. I don't know if you have these. Do you have these? When I type old into Microsoft Office, Word to be specific, I get these things: outdated, outmoded, archaic, out of date, right? And kind of Microsoft Office. Does your office group them into these four categories? They do? Okay, I see several nods of it. They do. So ancient, previous, old-fashioned, elder. Not very motivating. Not very uplifting. Certainly on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is optimistic, you would score a low score, right, on this. Now, I'd like to show you the happiness curve if you haven't seen it before. Right, this is a graph which shows how our happiness levels change over our lifetime or lifespan. So as you can see, in general, we start out life pretty happy, and then kind of, well, we become unhappy due to various things, the hassles of life and the burdens in life and responsibilities and maybe illnesses and so on. So by the time we reach our early 50s, oh yes, menopause and andropause, as we discussed in previous lectures, we kind of approach, we're kind of at our kind of trial or kind of lowest level of happiness, so to speak. But unfortunately for most of us, it does go up after that. Right. I don't know if this trial here, this bottom here coincides with menopause and andropause. It's kind of very uncanny timing there, really. It turns out that we become happier after our 50s, after our when we hit 60s. That's the happiness curve for us. But when we talk about aging tsunami and graying society, we don't think this, do we? No, we don't. We think aging as a problem. We think aging as something to be fixed. Let's look at the immunity curve. Now, with COVID-19 pandemic in the last 1.5 years, we know how our vaccine works, right? We know why we need 2 doses or more booster shots. That's because, right, the first time an antigen arrives in the body, we have an immune response only of a certain intensity. We need a second dose, depending on what the half-life is, so that the immune response can be marked. Yes? Some of us even require a third dose if you are in specific segments of the population. So this is the immunity curve. The small peak shows what that happens when the body first, right, gets the virus, and then there's a small immune response. The second peak shows when the virus returns, and we have a higher. In a nutshell, immunity is the older you are, the more viruses your body will remember. If you think about it. So those over the age of 50, right, has been found to catch half as many colds as the average 20-something-year-olds. So immunity is better 50 plus 60 or more. Once again, we don't get this when we read of aging. We don't. We don't remember this. We remember problem to be fixed. Remember tsunami, time bomb. Next one. Now you should have seen this. I think I showed this in lecture 1, and then thereafter I think lecture 3 or 4 on cognitive abilities related to aging. Now this chart shows the results of the longest running study into intelligence. Who remembers the name of the study? Okay, it's there. All right, Seattle longitudinal study. All right, it's there. Should I have given you the answer? Okay. So the SLS, right, shows that by the time participants reach their 40s, so look at age on the horizontal axis, 40s or 46, kind of see you kind of see declines, right? You see appreciation or rise in this line, the blue and the yellow. Then kind of by 46 or 40 something, everything else is on the decline, right? Yes, you see that, right? Um, when you compare 40s and 50s, the yellow and the blue, that means numeric ability, the yellow, and the blue, what is the blue? Verbal ability. You find that, according to the study, Seattle longitudinal study, that abilities in these two domains, on average, right, are of a higher level in persons 46 to 50, 53, or thereabouts. Is compared to ages before. That means 25 to 32, 32 to 39. You could see that on at least these two domains. Yes, you kind of see other domains kind of declining over time with age, with time. And they keep going down, yes. But these two domains at least were found, right? That essentially we are saying, look, there are at least two skills or two cognitive abilities that people age 50 plus have an edge over younger folks, younger people than them. Once again, when we say aging, when we say we're going to age from 20 to 30 years old, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and so on, we don't think this. We don't. We think problems. When I hit 50, I will be a problem. When I hit 60, I will become a problem either to myself or to my family. Right? That's what the word tsunami time bomb suggests, isn't it? In 1979, Ellen Langer was a young psychologist at Harvard University. She recruited a group of elderly men for a study and split them into two groups. Both groups were told they were going away for a week of reminiscence, and both groups spent a Tuesday in an old monastery just outside of town, outside of Boston. Right. The story goes that while the first group really would be reminiscing, the second group was doing something much more exciting. So the first group was thinking about good things in the past, good memories, good experiences. The second group, they was they were sent back in time in this way. Psychologists surrounded these men, now these were men, right? These men with props from the 1950s. So this study happened in 1979. These people were elderly, right? These people now in the second group were surrounded by were kind of put in this second. These people were put in this second group. Psychologists surrounded their rooms, right? They make props, and essentially the physical environment was like that in the 1950s. Okay, and Ellen Langer asked her subjects to act like it was 1959. So they watched old films, listened to old movies, listened to old songs, and kept up with news in the 50s on vintage radios. They discussed politics and Fidel Castro and the Cold War after the Second World War, right? And they admired NASA's first ever satellite launch like it happened yesterday, right? As if they were 20 years younger. So there was no help, nothing to remind these men what they were doing except the physical environment. So they continued their conversation. They can reminisce and think fondly about the past. But the only difference between the first group is that they had a physical surrounding, they had a physical environment that was like it, it would have been 20 years ago for these older people. So when all the men first arrived, the test subjects, you could call them, or participants, they could barely carry their own suitcase. Well, elderly, what do you expect? But by the time they left, these men were making meals, walking faster. As they boarded the bus to leave, they broke out into spontaneous game of American football And Alan Lange had tests before and after the retreat showed that a, a great deal of arthritis levels, dexterity, memory, even vision improve in both groups through this kind of time travel experiment, right? But the second group had a marked higher increase than the first. So if we think now, right? If we think now, many of the world's influential thinkers, who are some of them if you want to name them? Anybody? Influential thinkers of the world today. Yeah, the modern world. Whether dead or alive. Okay, never mind. Yeah. Nobody. Okay. If you think about people like, say, Ban Ki-moon, the previous UN Secretary General, let's say, influential thinker, right? Many people in the West would say Lee Kuan Yew. People in the West would say Lee Kuan Yew, yes, as an influential thinker, right? And then here in this part of the world, we may say Bill Gates as an influential thinker. These people, right? When they become influential, how old are they? When they were above 60. Yes, yes, right? Yet often we still think of aging as a social burden when we could think of aging, well, in terms of influential thinking. So, we in society today, one way to look at aging is say, look, let's put aside the old paradigm, the old way of thinking, the old concept, and let's think squarely at aging for what it is and consider its upsides. We call this the new paradigm. So think about a birthday card I showed just now. Now, if you have a birthday card like that, you will be more positive, right? You're not 60, you're 21 with 39 years of experience. Right? So think about what birthday card you give to your elder folks at home and people, your elder, more senior folks whom you haven't seen for the last 1.5 years due to the pandemic or now endemic, right? Which you might give a birthday card to. Think about the words there and what they mean to these people. So that is how I might introduce the concept of critical gerontology, because there really isn't a fixed definition of what it is, right? Critical gerontology can be seen as applications of critical theories or thinking into gerontology. Critical gerontology can be seen as a combinative way of questioning and criticizing the assumptions and theories of mainstream conventional gerontology. Critical gerontology is used often to describe a myriad of theoretical perspectives that counter the conventional construction of aging, and related policies that often overlook the social, economic, political, the various factors at play. Let's see. Three core elements. You have the slides. You don't have to copy. You have the slides. Three core elements. First, a recognition of the ideological and socially constructive concept of aging. Second, an understanding of aging as a dynamic process, not static process. And third, the rejection of aging as a biomedical construct, with instead emphasis on the political, social, economic, the various forces. So there are three main elements in this idea called critical gerontology. How did this come about? In the article that I asked you to read, one of the three, right, what we found, right, after digging into the past, right, the various literature that describe this field, is that it happened kind of in 1969 that two authors called Horkheimer and Adorno, they proposed this theory called critical theory, right, that posits the interplay between science and philosophy. which explains the issues with the current reality, identify agents of change, and provide goals to transform society. So you can think philosophy, science. If you've taken any course on that, right? That would be that area. 1969, critical theory. That theory gave rise to two theories, critical psychology and critical sociology, right? Which and eventually critical gerontology, which emerged in the late 1970s in the UK and and in the United States. So in the early years, critical gerontology served to make sense of a broad range of issues faced by older adults in society, such as insufficient income, poor housing, inaccessible health care, and so on. When older people stopped working and did not contribute to the economy, they become socially disempowered. According to structural analysis, this disempowerment of individuals makes individuals personally responsible for the structural problems of society, which is not very uplifting to the older folks. Such major societal problems is being blamed on the elderly or blamed with the aging process, right? Was really the impetus for this new paradigm called critical gerontology. The need to look at aging, age, and aged persons in a new light, in a light that is more positive, more optimistic, if you like. So the late 20th century has seen the beginnings of major paradigms that contributed to the development of critical gerontological theory. Paradigms such as life course theory, you might have heard of this in developmental psychology, age stratification, and lifespan development, right, have advanced this view. Critical gerontology kind of blends a broad spectrum of theories in the humanities and social sciences and extends aging research. So we can say that conventional gerontology, it's whatever that we know about old age, aging, and whatever we hear about in the mainstream, right? Critical gerontology challenges these conventions and try to uncover all the various blind spots. Think about the three core elements I've shown just now. So we can say conventional gerontology is an old paradigm where critical is a new paradigm. We can say the mainstream embraces conventional gerontology, the non-mainstream or the alternative stream, right, allows for critical gerontology. Right? Objective knowledge based on facts, based on scientific evidence, can say a lot of the conventional gerontological uh, knowledge is found there. Whereas often there are a lot of, on the other side, subjective realities, experiences, encounters, and so on that aren't found or uncovered by the scientific process, which give rise to critical gerontological thinking. Right. So data and methodological approaches also tend to be different. Right. In conventional, right, we see essentially cross-sectional studies, separate studies, biological, focusing on say biological domains or social domains, medical domains, and so on, right, of older people, right? In more critical gerontological, with studies with a critical approach, would have several domains intertwined, measured in different ways, both qualitative and quantitative. So there are three main theoretical sources in critical gerontology. Critical theory, I have mentioned that. There's also political economy and social phenomenology. Okay, let me see. Okay. Okay, let me just talk a little about what political economy is. Right. Political economy scholars understand the private struggles of older adults, such as depression and loneliness, social isolatedness, right, as being rooted in the relations between a capitalist economy and the state. They hold a view that older persons individually are powerless to alter their social status and condition. And such scholars, political economists, argue that it is the social structure that has generated the struggles of old age. The social structure, right, generates the struggles of old age. This is the one main contention of political economists. So political economists pay attention to age as a public issue, to the association of public, and they also pay attention to the association between this public issue of aging and private problems. So for instance, dementia. Is it just a private problem? Memory loss, cognitive impairment, getting lost and becoming a danger to self or others? Is it just a private personal problem? Or is it a societal problem when, say, 1 in 10 are afflicted with dementia? In fact, I, over the online class, we know that by the age of 85, 1 in 3, right, will have Alzheimer's disease, right? I made you look at 2 other persons, remember that? Right? Is this just an individual problem or is this a societal problem? Political economists would say, look, this is, right, a societal problem. Now, social phenomenology, what is that? These scholars argue that mainstream theories of aging take for granted the day-to-day lived experiences of people as they age. Although these theories examine alternatives in the conceptualizations of age and aging behavior along dimensions such as cohort and so on, the alternatives are predominantly understood as contextual factors or extraneous factors. So, social phenomenologists pay attention to processes by which age and age-related phenomena are generated and regenerated, most initially. They are concerned with the way ideas about and objects of aging are comprehended by those who encounter them. The Alzheimer's disease, for instance, AD experience, has been widely used to demonstrate the social construction of aging and age-related phenomena. That's social phenomenology. That means, look, this is a social phenomenon. So political economists says, look, society, um, it the social structure gives rise to problems in old age. That's political economy. The social structure gives rise to problem in old age. You can say the social economic structures, if you like, give rise to perhaps social economic problems in old age. So societal structures, social economic structures, systems are responsible for individual social economic problems. So that's political economy. Social phenomenologists kind of slightly different. I know they are related. The word social is there, right? But a bit different in the sense, in this way, right? These phenomenologists see that aging, so age, whether it's 50, 60, or 70, and age-related phenomena like mild cognitive impairment, dementia, right? These are constructed by the society. So if there's no society as we know society to be today, there's no age. 50 is no different from 60. Ageless, that's right. If there's no society as we know society today, according to social phenomenology, well, it's a mouthful, really, right? Then there's no such thing as cognitive impairment. Why study cognitive impairment on MCI? There's no need to. It's part of lifespan. That's about it. So that's social phenomenology for you in a very simple way. Right? So you can see we are going kind of into sociology, right? This aspect of this is probably the furthest I'll go in sociology. I know this is a psychology class, but just to give you the background and the context. Okay, so if you're lost, we'll come back. So there are 5 basic features you can read there. It's also in the article, right? I've said essentially these just now already. Criticize the critical gerontology does 5 things, 5 basic things. It criticizes the biomedical model of aging. It highlights social, economic, political, blah, blah, blah problems. It methodologically applies various levels of analysis to study aging. It recognizes the importance of social construction, as I have described by social phenomenology, right? And it links aging issues with the development and organization of social, political, economic action. So that's the basic. Now, why are we studying this? We're studying this because when we want to, right, later on, when we want to examine public policy, right, we want to have a background. We want to have a social, economic slash political background as context. We want to say, look, we need to do A, or we see A or B as a problem, but how this A or B problem translates into solution, which a public policy may be able to solve, right, is because we live in this context. The context is we need to understand, appreciate, and gerontology in a critical, in a new way of thinking, with a new way of thinking, in a critical manner. So four main areas critical gerontology is being studied: how public policy is framed, how social media presents image of older adults, how caregiving works, right? How caregiving work is done by women, mostly women, is credited, and how social ideologies value the lives and earlier contributions of older people. So those five features and the above areas show the core approaches of critical gerontology, such as human rights, biopsychosocial processes, and life course perspectives. There are various popular areas. I've just listed the more common ones, right, in critical gerontology. So vulnerable older adults is an area of study. Successful aging, right? We often take the term so loosely. Anything is successful aging. You have wealth is successful aging. You're happy is successful aging. You are, say, have a roof over your head is successful aging. You enjoy 3 generation, 4, or even 5 generation time with your children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. That's successful aging. What really is successful aging? That is critical gerontology for you. Life course approaches to study these topics. Human rights approach to study these topics. Okay, I'm going to zoom in just to ageism among the various popular areas. Now, older people are stereotypically associated with characteristics of warmth and friendliness, right? That has been found, right, by research, but also deemed incompetent and frail. So these subjective yet overgeneralized stereotypes overstates the distinctions between ages and are strong influences for paternalistic prejudices and discrimination. So in a nutshell, what that is saying is, look, because we believe that these older people are somewhat not good at certain things, not good at certain aspects, so we tell them what to do because we are right. They should follow. That's paternalism, right? And we often operate this or apply this in healthcare. So think about what doctors, nurses, social workers say to your older father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, right? When they come into the hospital, when they go into community hospital, right? Uncle, you should do this. Uncle, you cannot do that, right? In a pandemic, we often do that, right? We tell older people what to do as if we know what they should do, right? Ageism and COVID-19 is a really good case study, right? And this has been published in this article, which you can read. It was just published last year, right? Should the main question in this article is this: should chronological age be the homogeneous determinant of the acceptable response to the challenge posed by the disease, the COVID-19 disease? Should chronological age be the homogeneous determinant? Second question: should chronological age be a homogeneous determinant? Right. What's D? D means the one and only. A means one among several, one among a few, or one of some. All right, the difference? You're clear on that? That's essentially the question posed in the article. The BSG, British Society of Gerontology, says, we urge the government to reject the formulation and implementation of policy based on the simplistic application of chronological age. Now, the most well-known application is simply, look, if you're beyond a certain age, you should not, or you must not, or there's a rule to say you cannot go out of somewhere. You must stay at home. You cannot be in the hospital for more than X number of days. Right? You should not do this, and so all the rules that apply only to people above a certain age, 60, 65, or 70, something like that. So BSG says ageism, right, is a stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against people on the basis of their age. And we see this happening in the pandemic, at least in the very start, when human beings, well, are kind of at a loss, really, for how to deal with the pandemic, right? And the BSG says we reject firmly the ageist and stereotypical assumptions that underlie public and policy pronouncements. Next, in the World Economic Forum that happened late last year, Aquinola reported. Even before the pandemic, reports showed that many older adults were already more socially isolated. We know this in the literature before the pandemic, and have experienced more loneliness than the rest of the population. Coronavirus containment measures, including confinement measures, physical distancing, and restrictions on movement and social gatherings, increased the risk for social isolation and loneliness. The similar views are shared by the Journal of Clinical Nursing. Right? Over the course of the pandemic, we have seen evidence of openly ageist discourses. So openly promoting discrimination just based on an age number, which we argue, the journal says, that complicates the experiences of living through COVID-19 among older people. APA, we all know who they are, right? Later that year, even later reported, negative stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination toward older adults during the pandemic. Triaging. Triaging is a healthcare process. Triaging inadequate protections in care facilities in the larger community can translate into worse healthcare, not better, and increased tragic loss of older adults' lives. APA further says ageism negatively affects older adults' mental health as they face being devalued. Think about you, think about the older adult being pushed into the emergency department, being pushed from one department to another just to do one test and just to find one clinical indicator, right? Viewed as a burden, discriminated against. Ultimately, ageism influences how all age groups view their own aging and older adults. So the same way we treat these older people is possibly going to be similar to the way we treat ourselves in the future, or our future offsprings, right? Younger people treat us when we arrive at that age. So ageism and the stereotypes and discriminations that's perpetuated by this concept perpetuates itself. That's what APA is saying. Help Age International, an organization, an NGO, it says separating generations may worsen actually intergeneration tensions and ageist attitudes and prevent older people from playing their part in solidarity with younger generations, which the BSG agrees. The Irish Gerontology Society added a new dimension around the rationing of care. Now think about the early days of the pandemic when healthcare facilities were just inadequate because we don't know how much money to put into what kind of care. Say just the use of face mask, surgical mask. We just didn't have enough. Remember the earlier days. So treatment for COVID-19 and other forms of resource allocation associated with this crisis must be based on need, not age. It is concerning that we are hearing reports from other countries that when it comes to decisions around available treatments, be it home care supports, medicines, or ventilation, that age alone was being used as a criteria. So if you recall in the earlier days when, say, there was one country, Italy, which really had a big number of fallouts, if you recall. After the Wuhan outbreak, one of the other countries that got it was Italy, right? In Japan. If you recall those stories, then Italy, that kind of around Central Europe, right? If you recall those times, about a year and a half. And older people were kind of not given the ventilators. Yes, of course, there were also older people who say, look, I'm already 89, give it to the younger folk. We also have those stories, right? And we read many of them. These stories, whether it's told in person, right, told as an aftermath, or read, just everywhere on the net, including YouTube, which you can find. So the authors of this article kind of conclude that resource allocation in a pandemic like this to prevent further promotion of or perpetuating of ageism, that must be based on need, not age. Morbidity, which is death, cumulative chronic illnesses, and pre-acute illness, physical condition, should sufficiently indicate or predict likelihood of a good outcome and surviving an illness, not age. An arbitrary age cutoff takes none of these into account, which happened right in the earlier days, perhaps even today in many countries managing the pandemic. Prioritizing younger, healthier patients with a higher chance of recovery, as has been suggested in other countries, in itself is ageist in the most extreme. It is an ageist practice. Life years saved equals ageist. If you go by number of life years saved, you're perpetuating ageism. The key issue is, according to the authors, older adults are a homogeneous group. That's the issue, because older adults are not a homogeneous group, as we understand, due to the various complexities, the various experiences which differ. Right? We learned so far, right, in the last few weeks, where uh, physical aging is concerned, where cognitive aging is concerned, where the meeting of andropause slash menopause is concerned. We don't have a homogeneous group that kind of all or almost all experiences the particular phenomenon in the same way around the same time in their life. Right? So it's not like all above 70 are the same, all above 80 are the same. It cannot be. Right? With regard to being helpless, frail, unable to contribute to society. So the World Economic Forum says ageism tends to paint all adults as the same. The reality is older adults are diverse and have several different identities. They are more than their age, according to Akinola. So early mortality data, shows that right age, gender, pre-existing illness does predict death due to COVID-19. Yes, not just age. The IGS then said that during the pandemic, we must be mindful that every age group in society, right, older people are a very heterogeneous group. There are many older people who are very well. We must caution against placing all older people in one large homogeneous group. Labeling all of them as highly vulnerable, frail, and passive agents is obviously incorrect and inappropriate. There is one outlier in this debate. It comes from BGS, British Geriatrics Society, right, which is a membership association for professionals specializing in older people's healthcare. It says we see major differences between different groups in healthy life expectancy at 65. However, even fit older people show poorer immune responses than the younger cells in the face of infection. The speed of the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't allow us to assess each person over 70 for individual risk. And the government has made a pragmatic decision. This is the only defense, pragmatism or practicality. So, what happens after an emergency? Okay, so COVID-19 happens. We all don't really know what to do about it. We scramble, and we come to a state where we now live with it, called the endemic. We should now possibly recognize that age is not homogeneous, and that indicates that a simple response to any healthcare emergency, infectious disease emergency, right, should not go beyond what is necessary. Given time to reflect upon the data, why would this not change, and at what cost is the policy at the long term? It's a question asked by the authors of the article, and BGS hasn't commented publicly on this further. So we see the overriding question which arises from this debate is whether the current treatment across the world of older adults is institutionalized ageism or pragmatic policy. This is something you can think about. Is it is policy that's happening to deal with the pandemic structural making ageism an age-old, in fact, making ageism a strong foundational structure in society. Discriminate, discriminate based on age number. Are we institutionalizing ageism? That's one question. Or are we just being practical? That's the pragmatic policy. That means this time there is a need for this, we'll do it this way. If your age or however old you are, you happen to be in that group, which is, then we will deal with you this way, right? When there is no need, we'll deal with you another way. That's debatable. And this is not a simple dichotomy. Within several layers of tension to be resolved. When we come to deconstruct this institutionalized ageism versus pragmatic policy further, the manner in which we do this or the approach we take adds complexity. We confront two major perspectives. One is called positivism, and the other is called interpretivism. That is, our assumptions about reality are framed by our ways of exploring this reality. Thus, an older person's interpretation of frailty and dependency in late old age emerges from the lived experiences of the change in their body, which is different from from the interpretation of the family caregiver, let's say, or somebody else who cares, who draws on relational understanding, and the professional care worker who assesses the apparent needs of these older people, drawing on technical training, professional training, uh, and again, different from the geriatrician who prescribes medication or aids based on medical knowledge. Right? We approach, each of us approach the older adult from our own perspective. That's what you say, right? Is there really an objective truism or reality out there? Or is the reality that is faced or experienced by these older people subjective because we see them through the eyes of our own professional or personal lenses? That's the question asked here. Is it positivism or is it interpretivism? If it is the second one, right, if it's through our lenses, it's interpretivism. I interpret what he or she is going through. If I really put myself in his shoes accurately, that is positivism. All right? Okay. Complex experiences are reduced often to one simplified reality. Right? That is called the reductionist approach in order to deal with problems. Which these complex experiences are often reduced and then measured, legitimized, prioritized, and ultimately modifies, reconstructs, and reorganizes the social reality of the lived experiences itself. The simplified reality becomes the accepted reality by the individuals, society, and the institutions that comprise it. Indeed, it has long become recognized that negative stereotypes of older adults lead to an internalization of that negative image by the older person himself. So now how you perceive me as an older person will affect how I perceive myself as an older person. If you say all my problems are just a simple problem of aging or age, then with time, repeated people kind of taking that same thinking and interpreting my problems, I will start to believe that is true. So then your interpretism has influenced my own life experiences, I influence my positivism. This is where both concepts interplay. A bit abstract, right? Right, right. This is probably the most abstract concept here that I will cover in this lecture. Just for us to understand that when we want to use a public policy perspective or sort of deal with Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and in the later half of the semester, sleep problems of older people, mood problems of older people, anxiety problems of older people, retirement, work issues, caregiving issues. If we want to say, look, we need a public policy, the government must do this, the state must do that, healthcare facilities must provide this, right? Rather than, if we want to take that perspective, we must start to think, right? are we, when we kind of provide care for these people, help them this way, that way, with this and that, are we institutionalizing an age-related or age-based discrimination, i.e., ageism, or are we actually being practical here and solving what needs to be solved at that point in time for the right people? That is pragmatic policy. Right? This is the context I'm giving us. Questions? Yes. Right. I hear you saying neglect, possibly, possible neglect. The word neglect kind of suggests to me, from what I understand from the literature so far, as an idea based on need. So that is fine to these people who argue for what we call pragmatic policy. Right. So if we don't do this, we neglect. What do we neglect? We actually neglect the needs. Yes, we neglect that person, but what about that person? We don't neglect his identity. We neglect his, well, in that case, in a hospital scenario, will be a medical need, right? Because I take away a ventilator from him and give it to her, let's say, right? Then yes, then that thinking will be based on pragmatic policy. Yep, it's difficult in practice to, well, implement a line, right, to be drawn. Yeah. So what we are discussing here, or the debate that I'm kind of presenting here between what we call conventional gerontology and critical, between institutionalized ageism and pragmatic policy, really is a conceptual one. But this debate sets the context, the current context of where and how we might situate and operationalize and implement and perhaps later on upscale various programs, services, and public policy, right, for the people to so-called solve problems. Or do we want to so-called solve problems, or do we want to actually meet needs? Right? So talk to any individual on the street, most of them will say, you're talking about the same thing. What are you talking about? Right? But here we want to think a bit more deeper. Right? Solve problems and meet needs may not be the same thing. Yeah? All right. So we will have room for debate on this, because in the debates to come, we have what, 4 more debates to come. You might find yourself actually taking one or more of such contexts as you argue your motion. Certainly in your journal, your reflective journal entry, you may not, I made it such that you cannot reflect directly on topics like this. But if the debate, any of the debate topics, motion, or anything raised by either side on the debate, kind of bring up some of these concepts that are covered today, you are free to write about it in your journal. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Because the second part of the lecture is very short, 15 slides only, I think you saw, or less than that. This is the bulk of the slides are here. Yeah. Okay, so I think this is the last slide in this first deck. So future directions of research in the area of critical gerontology, right, are going to most likely focus on these 4 main kind of areas: anti-ageism slash racism. Today we might even call this ethnicitism, because race may not be the same as ethnicity. Therefore, racism may not be the same as discrimination based on ethnic groups. What's the difference? I won't go there. We really go beyond into sociology already if we go there. Next area, sustainable development and equity. That means fairness, equity, fairness, or impartiality. Sustainable development, that means whatever we provide to older people or to whoever who needs certain services, could we sustain them? Could we implement and upscale later on? Role of NGOs. So should government do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and everything? Should government provide the money, provide the manpower, provide the professional development, everything? Or would that fail at some point and NGOs should take over? And finally, how does the digitization of the world change older adults' experiences? And vice versa, how do older adults participate in a digitized or digital world that we live in? Okay, that would be my final slide in this segment before the break. Let's see if anybody online has any comments or questions. Nope. Um, yep, if you are on your laptop, you go to YouTube, go to my channel, you could also see this lecture happening. Anyone with any comments, questions before a break? If not, let's take a 15-minute. We'll be back for 15 slides on public policy, and I'll give a short class exercise. We call it a day from there. If it's possible, yeah, feel free to sit with your team. We'll have a group exercise to prepare you for the CA 4 and 5 as part of, and you will kind of be taught the process of doing that. Yeah, so give a 1 minute or two to move if you need. Yeah. So in your own, you're all in your own groups. There are 10 tables here, 10. So you can have your 10 teams seated just nice. Yeah, I mean, if it's possible. So I will go through the 15 slides or less. After these 15 slides, right, you will know kind of some of the steps, how we can analyze a public policy. And then we have a short exercise for each team to kind of start to craft some kind of analysis, a simple analysis. So we give another, say, a minute to move your chairs, move your things if you want to. This part will be more, your teamwork part will carry more time than my talking. Just now, earlier half is more my talking. So people online, welcome back. I hope you can hear me, people online. So online, if you just check to see if you type yes, you can hear me online on the YouTube. That would be great. So I know. Thank you, Janani, Constance. I see your yes responses. Okay, all right. So, okay. I mean, by the way, if you are interested on my YouTube channel, Wayne Freeman Chong, which is the name of the channel, really, yep, yep. I have no fancy names for this. Really, very boring, very mundane. Basically, it contains my sessions, the classes I taught last semester in person. So you can have a look, have an advanced look if you want to kind of have an impression of what is to come, so to speak. And you can also you may be able to appreciate the difference or the differences in the content. Well, I would say 80%, 90% same content, but the delivery could be a bit different. Last semester I had 23 students. So this semester we have 50. So I don't know next semester will be how many. Hopefully not 100 or something. Because I don't really like I talk, you listen kind of theater style. Doesn't make sense for me because you can see I kind of move around and I move my hands and stuff like that. So yeah, I will be very uncomfortable just standing there and looking at you and you looking at me. Really. So okay. Um, let's see. Over the break, I had a few questions. And I also realized I forgot to show this. So I thought since I prepared this, I might as well show this. Um, hang on, I got the wrong one. Is this correct? Sorry, I got the wrong PowerPoint slide. Just a moment. Um, on the reflective journal CA3, right? This should be the one. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I think I should show this. Um, this is something I observed from last semester's work, where I told the students then there's some areas that people kind of forgot to adhere to. For instance, the APA edition 7. So I do require you to follow APA 7, right? Despite it being a short piece, 400 to 500 word, right? So remember to do that. So the references obviously do not go into the word count, right? If not, it's going to be very tough. And then I give some suggestions on kind of what I mean or how to really operationalize or how to carry out what I call deep reflection in terms of written content. So instead of say from the debate, I learned that it's better to age with a spouse, or it's not necessarily better to age with a spouse. Let's say you learn that, but you just write that. That is to me, right? Well, okay, you learn something, but you can go deeper than that, right? You can say, look, right from debate, after learning this part, or from the debate's motion, I realized I could do this differently, or I could think this in another way. That's to me, right, a deeper reflection, right? From report to demonstrate, right? Instead of saying this could be done, that could be done, like it's a report, you can say you can actually show it by saying this is how one could do it. You can list the steps. From what to why. So, well, give your personal reason rather than just say, this is that is that, and I learned this, I learned that, this is good, that is not good, right? Be more specific. I think you understand that. And then from everyone to me, meaning, right, say you can self-disclose a bit that is relevant to the topic of reflection. Any questions? This I just put this from last semester's kind of slide, so hopefully it's useful. It's actually found in the document already. All right. Okay. All right. Then we should define. Okay, let's go on to public policy process. Okay. The earlier part of the lecture kind of introduces us to the various perspectives, contexts, right, that our aging, and related phenomenon is situated or are situated in. If we want to either problem solve, fix problems, or we want to meet needs, whichever, regardless of whichever perspective you take, right? We often run into a situation where we say the country should provide a lot more resources should be made available. A certain program should be implemented, or a certain law legislation should be enacted, so so people could stop doing something, or will start doing something, right? So these are examples of public policy, right? And we discuss this in the context of geropsychology because we know that a lot of times psychological phenomena in older people, right, are very much dependent on the wider context out there, right? They're very much dependent on well, as I said earlier, the social structures, political structure, economic structures, and systems. And we also say, look, many of those interventions that we do, caregiving, and then sleep interventions, mood intervention, the various interventions we do, whether targeted or not so targeted to age-related phenomena or problems or issues, right, may require uh, more than intrapersonal or individual uh, resources. I mean, cognitive, individual biological, individual social resources, abilities, if you like memory. That's a cognitive resource, right? So when we arrive at such a situation, then we have no choice but to start to entertain. And then when we start to entertain, we have to educate ourselves on how public policy, at least in health/social care, right, operate. Therefore, I hope to just spend about 15 slides to kind of go through how a process like that happens. I'm now taking the process from America's Center for Disease I don't know what they call that. It's called CDC, which we all know. You know what that is? Center for Disease Prevention and Control and Prevention. They have a model for doing public policy. The reason why is because of this next slide. Singapore Civil Service College does have a policy process, and it was published in 2007. However, if and when you do look it up, and you can find it in our NTU library if you look it up, right? If you do, and when you do that, you would find out that it is only, say, 8 pages long, including references or something. Not, not too much guide on how to kind of carry out the process, right? I don't know if it is because uh, of some information secrecy out there. So that is the latest document I can find in the public domain, which is available if you search our library. So our Singapore government civil service does have a policy process. The initiate policy, followed by initiate. Okay, let's say if we start at initiate policy, if we start there, then identify problem, identify options, and decide. Then implement whatever you decide, and then evaluate the outcome of the implementation, which will then lead you to either better the current policy or a new policy. Right? Simple enough to understand the flow. Right? Of course, so this happens in a cycle, and then the civil service are always emphasize these things, like values, ethics, principles. They used to use the word ethos. All these are loaded words, but well, they carry strategic principles that kind of underlie, I beg your pardon, underlie this process. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of 6-step process. Right, but that's about it. We don't really get guidance from Civil Service College, at least in the public domain, on how to do behavioral insights, for instance, on say how in the identification and analyzing of problems, what exactly is qualitative feedback and how do we obtain it? How do we approach qualitative? How do we approach the taking of or collection of qualitative feedback? Right? What do we consider as qualitative and what do we not consider as qualitative feedback, and so on? Right? What are the various theories? So we don't get more or less more than this diagram, which is why I find it useful for our purposes in this course, HP 3303, to rely on a yet more recently published process by the CDC in the US, Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So in 2015, you can click on this on your slide, or you can just go to their website and find elaborated version. I really condensed what I could into kind of 15 slides or less, a lot more elaboration there, even video guides, video tutorials on many of those processes, right, which you can find on your own. So not very different if you think about it in terms of the processes from just now, civil colleges, 6 steps, but here there are 8. So let's say we start from 1, problems identification, kind of similar, you have that. 2, policy analysis. 3, development of strategy and policy. So this is something probably not found in the previous. Policy enactment, that is kind of also not found. Okay, well, you can argue this is probably decision making. Policy implementation, yes. And then you have evaluation, yes, it is found there in the previous. And then there is this stakeholder engagement and education, which kind of isn't found there. But of course, you can argue that stakeholder engagement and education are part and parcel of the principles, core values of the Singapore Civil Service College. So these are 8 processes, and talk a little bit more about each one. Okay, so CDC prescribes, right, or guidelines on part 1 of the process, right? In part 1, in identifying the problem, what really we want to do, kind of in a nutshell, are to clarify the problem or issue. So when we say ageism, no, that's not a public policy problem. Right? That's not a public policy issue. No, that may be a wider societal issue, or it could be a cause of a certain, it could give rise to a need to develop a certain new policy. But ageism isn't a right public policy issue. Why? Because CDC, well, being part of healthcare, right, essentially have health outcomes as indicators. So CDC would prescribe that an issue or a problem be written, be described in terms of their effect on public health, or in fact population health. That means mortality. That's problem. People die. High mortality rate or high comorbidity rates. That means multiple illnesses, right? So that's just an example. Or high suicide rates, like self-harm, for instance. So collect, summarize, interpret information relevant to a problem or issue. So the CDC actually have guidelines on how to do this on their website, how to collect. Well, you won't find this to be too different from our data collection in research, which some of you have learned. Collect information. So information gathering, often we say, I've done some research and here's what I found. That's just information gathering, right? We don't call that research, right? So we could do that as part of collect, summarize, right? Put everything or synthesize together, and then understand in your own way, that's the interpret information relevant to a certain problem. Define the characteristics of a problem, so things like frequency, duration, severity, economic impact, the various impacts. And obviously, not all the time data is available out there. That's when one has to decide whether or not, one has to make a suggestion on whether or not resources should be put in just to collect the data. That means the gap in information or gap in data could be a problem itself, could be an issue itself to be solved by a policy. For instance, there is, let's say, in Singapore, we have the PDPA, right? You heard about that, right? Personal Data Protection Act. Because of that, right, in the public domain, right, NRC numbers, NRIC information is restricted to only like 4 digits at the back. Yeah, you know that, right? So that means we have a data loss of the first 5 digits, right, of the NRIC, so to speak, in the public domain. So is that going to be a problem? If that is a problem for any aspect of population health, then we may need a policy to mandate or to require full NRIC disclosure in certain situations. The mandate could be a law, it could be a guideline, it could be a industry-wide practice. Right? Any of these are policies. Right? Okay, let's move on. Okay, policy analysis. Identify policy options to address the problem and or issue, and use quantitative and qualitative methods to determine the most effective option. So here what we are saying is we have identified the problem already. Now let's look at the various alternatives, the choices we have in terms of policy solutions. Right? Of course, there may be other solutions that is not a policy solution. So let's come back to the issue of dementia. Right, let's say the Alzheimer's disease, let's say, okay, 1 in 3 above 85, public health problem, public health issue. So what are the various options? So if we talk about individual options, then we can say, look, one individual option could be provide, let private entities, private companies provide individual healthcare to persons 85 and above. That's not a policy solution, right? By allowing these companies to come into the industry in a state setting or national setting, that allows for individuals aged 85 and above and all their families to procure or purchase such services, right? So that would perhaps it would be when we say it's up to the individual to whether or not to procure such services, we are saying, look, we don't need a public policy for this. That's an individual solution. If we need a public policy for this, then we say, look, many of these 85 people aren't procuring because either they don't have the funds or they just do not have the physical accessibility to procure this. So they do not procure. Right? Then we need a public policy to allow greater accessibility. or affordable. Right. So to find out whether the problem is accessibility or affordability, yes, some data collection needs to be conducted and some analysis needs to be made, right? And that is what we call the research behind it. So this research will describe how policy will impact, let's say, morbidity. So another example, death rate or illness rate, health impact, political operational factors associated with the implementation, right, would also be considered at this stage. So would there be opposing forces? Would this other industry say no if you allow retirement age to go beyond 67 or 70, right? Then perhaps big companies are going to suffer. They have to keep re-employing older adults, and then some bigger companies may say, "Look, my productivity may drop or will drop," and they may even have the statistics to show among their 10,000 employees of certain age bands is the productivity. How much financial turnover from this group, financial turnover from that group, so on and so forth. So will we face opposition from there? So we have to consider this in this segment called policy analysis or part 2, how the costs compare with benefits. So cost benefit analysis or cost effectiveness analysis. Those are cost effectiveness analysis is one big, I would say, research slash evaluation method on its own, right? Entire an entire diploma could be just structured on how to do cost effectiveness analysis. Just spend 1 year, 1.5 years just to study that. People do their PhDs just on cost effectiveness analysis, both the conceptual part as well as mostly the data analytics aspect, and do a project on that. And then eventually, among the various policy options, which is more important, which could be more implementable in a sooner fashion, what we call prioritizing. Okay. So the third part, strategy and policy development. Identify the strategy for getting the policy adopted and how the policy will operate. So here, problem has been identified, analysis of various options has been conducted, and a certain priority or ranking has been decided upon, right? Now it is to consider different ways to get the new policy going, right? It's not even the getting it, it's not even taking action yet, it's to consider how to take action. Right? So we decided we probably want to do A, then we have a backup plan B. That's about it. Let's say that's the policy. So policy A, we want to proceed. We will have policy B in the case that in these 2 or 3 scenarios, but 90% will go policy A. So maybe that's the strategy. Right now, does it work? Can we do it? How will we operate? How will we get various industries, various stakeholders, various players, right, who are affected, who contribute, who are on the receiving end, who are the resource providers of this policy to come together to kind of cooperate. Right. So that's and what is needed for policy enactment and implementation. Yeah, behind. Define a strategy for engaging stakeholders and policy actors. So there are people in the policy process or chain that may not understand what you are trying to do. They may need to understand. There are some people in the chain who may have their own ideas, who may, well, need to come and be a part of your team. So engaging is important. And finally, draft the policy. So a policy, according to CDC, could be a law, a regulation, a procedure, an industrial action, and others. Right. So it could be a program. It could be a service. Okay. Then policy enactment, the fourth one. Follow internal or external procedures for getting the policy enacted or passed. That means now that a decision has been made in number 2, first, problem has been identified. Second, decision is made on what policy to more or less approach. Third, have a plan on how to get it going, get a policy going. And the fourth is to actually get it going, right, by getting the various people who hold the keys to open. That means if it's a law, get Parliament, get Congress, get the Senate, get the President to approve it if it's a law. If it is some other form of policy, then get the relevant authority, get the relevant players who hold the key to actually come on board, to actually uh, endorse, so to speak. So that will be enactment. So I want you to differentiate number 3 from number 4. Can you do that? Number 3 is to plan before it does get going. Number 4 is to get the key into the keyhole and turn the key, right? That's number 4. And then we go on to number 5. Number 5 is actually opening the door. So you have opened the door, you have gotten the key, all the various keys, you have opened the door. Now is to move forward. Now is to actually get it implemented. That means roll it out on the ground. Often we say we start with a pilot, then we move into mainstream. Often we say we start with a small scale local implementation, followed by a larger scale statewide implementation. Right? So there are various ways to do that, depending on who, what, when, and so on. The 5 W's, 1H. And then, of course, as this probably the implementation part often is the most tricky bit, right? The details are all here, right? Because different details would occur at different places because they're necessary or not unnecessary or have a different weightage or in terms of necessity at different areas. Right, so coordinate resources, different places have different resources. Assess implementation, compliance with the actual intent of the policy. Often say in providing, okay, let's just say in Singapore, right? Do we have a caregiving policy? Do we have a policy where, say, in Singapore, do we have a law that recognizes who the official caregiver is for an older person? Do we have? Okay, how about this? Easier question. In Singapore, think about childcare, childbirth, okay? In Singapore, do we have a law that recognizes who is the legal parent, father or mother, of a child who is born in Singapore, whose birth is registered in Singapore? Do we have? Yes, we do. What is the name of the policy or what's the name of the document? Anybody? Birth, that's right, birth registration. Exactly. Right. Okay, good. You don't have to think so hard, right? But my first question is we cannot think of an answer to who is the registered caregiver because there isn't. We have no policy on that. What is the implication of that? The implication is anyone can claim to be a caregiver of some older person, even if he or she is not biologically related or legally related to you. So I can be caregiver to my neighbor, and so then I can, in a certain place, claim welfare, get some money, right? Because the money I will spend on this Mr. So and so or Uncle so and so, right? We could do that. So think about in Singapore we when we bring when you bring your older folk to the hospital and you say, look, okay, he or she doesn't have enough Medisave to cover the medical expenses. Can I use mine? I don't know if you have been in that kind of situation before. Right? So we do have policy in Singapore, a rule which says, look, spouse, children, immediate biologically related children, right? These people's Medisave account, the government endowment fund called CPF, Central Provident Fund. One of the accounts is called the Medisave account, right? It's part of the Singapore's 3M framework. Go Google it, 3M framework. One of the M is called Medisave, right? Singapore government allows the use of that bit of savings, endowment savings, for your loved one, older person. It's allowed. But what if have no? What if I have no children? I mean, let's say I'm 85, no children, and I have somebody is willing to care for me, my neighbor or so and so, who is 20 years younger than me. Right. He doesn't mind even using his or her own CPF. And one day I land in the hospital. I'm really become I'm unable to make a decision. I'm unable to communicate now. How? Who will pay for my expenses? Well, if he or she doesn't pay, then the state will have to pay, right? somehow, right? But in order to do that, I have to go through a lot of process, be listed as a destitute person, and then go under Destitute Act, and so on and so forth. By the way, the Destitute Act is an act, is a law in Singapore which governs some of these we have some of these provisions. So my point is, we may not have that foolproof kind of caregiver policy in Singapore, at least not in the identification of a caregiver tied to a certain older person who has certain medical needs, let's say, beyond the biological family, right? Unlike the parent, father or mother of a newborn. So back to the point here, in these different cases, we will have different ways to implement policy. Which is easier in which area is it easier to implement new program and services? In the case of parent-child, or in the case of older person and adult child? What do you think? So if I want to provide more services and programs for, say, preschool children aged 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, right? Yes, I have a legitimate company and so on, right? I've well qualified people. I want to say, look, I want to get the government to subsidize, say, 20% because it will benefit the entire population in Singapore who are 2 to 3 years old. Surely this is a public contribution I'm making, although I also have my own private gains, right? So is it easier to do this? Or is it easier to do something like that? And with older people, I want to provide all 85 to 90-year-olds in Singapore, some who are frail, who needs a walking stick. Let's say I want to give them free of charge. But could the government subsidize 50% of my cost? Let's say. Which is easier to do? Well, the answer differs. Right? If you think, look, there's more rules already and people are clear on what's happening and what's not, then clearly the first case, parent-child, is easier. Because I know exactly which authority to approach. I know exactly which legislation or which legislations my action will come under. Right? That's easy. Right? That's easy. However, if you think, look, where are the public sympathies? That means where do authorities, where do the public kind of sympathize? Which problem would the public kind of sympathize more with? Then maybe you would argue that, look, that the second program is easier to kind of implement. Well, because it's very clear cut visually, it's very clear cut that people who are, say, limping on one leg, right, can make good use of a walking stick, a pair of walking stick. Very clear cut, tangible, concrete, depending on how you see it, right? So depending on how you see the industry you are in, the legislation framework you're in, whether it's clear cut many legislations or not so clear cut few or no legislations, then your policy implementation will differ. That's my point. Move on. All right. Stakeholder engagement and education. In areas where problems and solutions are not clearly defined, not clearly understood, a lot of these has to be done, where stakeholders groups are not even clear to begin with. So as I gave the example just now, caregiver of an older person. We know caregivers are obviously stakeholders in the aged care process, right? In aged care services and programs. But who are they really? We don't really know, other than cumulatively, most of them are either foreign domestic workers or the daughters of older mothers and older fathers who are often married themselves with their own kids, own children, younger children, right? We don't really know. So how do we get these people on board? Let them know what's happening. Let them know what they're entitled to. How do we get groups that are necessary? So if it's a healthcare policy, we need hospitals to buy in. If it's a social care policy, we may still need hospitals to buy in, right? Because hospitals discharge older people from hospital wards back into home, right? Into the community. So if the hospitals don't discharge because, let's say, the hospital will not discharge until many of the social problems are solved, that gives rise to frailty, falling down at home, risk of suicide, then we'll have a very high hospitalization rate or hospital bed occupancy rate, to be specific, right? But there'll be very little to do for our social service agencies, right, in the community. But if you turn that around and say, look, hospitals will discharge the moment any small bit of clinical symptoms show improvement, then you kind of flip the problem around and say, look, no, the medical problem is now uh, 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 is now falls on the burden, falls on the shoulders of society, of the community. Then community agencies and social service centers, right, would find themselves having greater roles to play, right? So depending on which industry, which problem, and where is the jurisdiction, right, that one falls under, different stakeholders we should be engaged with different intensities. Okay. Finally, in every one of the one, two, three, four, six, in every one of the six processes, I mean, one, two, three, four, five, and engagement six, in every one of the six processes earlier, an evaluation or one or more evaluations could be conducted, right, to have a greater understanding of the fidelity of each of those processes. What do we mean? In the problem identification, we could actually evaluate the process of identifying the problem. Did we really go through due process, or did we just based on subjective, arbitrary decision on who says what the problem is, therefore that is the problem approach, right? So an evaluation can happen at the policy analysis, strategy development, each of those processes. So this is why it's in kind of the inner circle. So here we say conduct evaluation of prioritized evaluation questions. For example, was the problem defined in a way that prioritized action, or was the problem very or too loosely defined? How were stakeholders engaged, or was the engagement of stakeholders kind of left to their own devices of the agencies involved? Is the policy being implemented as intended, or is the policy being implemented fully based on ground sentiment, on say practical realities at the point of implementation? Right? What is the impact of the policy? Right? Um, is it an impact on physical health, mental health? Is it social impact, economic impact, and so on? Okay. Okay. So this essentially covers the entire process, the entire policy process prescribed by CDC, right? From the first one, clarify and frame the problem, to identify options, to identify strategy to get the policy adopted, to following procedure to actually get the policy passed or enacted, and then translate the policy into action, monitor uptake and ensure full implementation, and then identify and connect with various stakeholders, various people, groups, agencies, authorities, and educate them if necessary. And then finally, evaluating each of the above steps or process. Right. And then we go back to the first one, problem identification. So new problem arise. Because as we implement, as after evaluation, we realize, okay, we have plugged a gap, but we have now created another gap. We have plugged two gaps, but now we realize there's a bigger hole out there, for instance. Okay, I think that's about it. That's about it, really. There are these above slides, 10 of them, are actually based on the second and third reading I asked you to do. You actually found the detail on how to carry out each of the seven, right? The details, the detailed questions and considerations that should be made pertaining to each of these seven processes are found in those two documents, CDC's document. I hope you understand, you know what documents I'm talking about. They're found in the content area, the required readings panel section of the course site, yeah? So I hope that is okay. So that will form the basis of helping you to get your assignment, the written assignment part done. Right? Of course, I will still write just like CA2 and CA3, I will still have a written description and assessment criteria on how I will grade CA4 and CA5. But as you already know, CA4 is a digital media creative piece done by the team. You will show and you create and show the class and me, right, something, website or song or film or something, right, that will, well, I'll give you the guidelines that will solve one problem, right? The second part is your decision process, the thinking through behind how, why, what are the five W's and one H of creating that digital media piece. That part, the steps or process to guide you will be these policy documents, right? You've got, because you will find yourself requiring to think through what is the problem, right? So problem ID, identification. You will find yourself needing to evaluate various alternatives out there, right? And deciding on the priorities. And then third one, you will realize that, okay, after you've decided, you will find yourself uh, looking at, looking at development, how to having a plan, a need to find a plan to get various people on board, to get, no, in fact, to even get the policy or the program or service passed, right? Get the keys into the keyhole, right? Okay, so let's see how much time we have. Okay, now 2:50. What we can do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We'll do a short class activity. Each group in your tables, in your team, define a public health problem, right, as in as detailed, in as specific as you can, that may be caused or made worse by ageism in Singapore, aside from COVID-19. Because I have already done that for you in the slides. Think of something. So consider there are five of you in the team, or four or five, right? You may have different, right? That's okay. Consider and find a public health problem. The best is among yourself, find two or three problems and then argue or debate or discuss among yourself to find and to prioritize which you believe to be, what the team believe to be the greatest or most grave, the gravest problem, public health problem that is caused by ageism, right? Or at least aggravated, made worse by ageism in Singapore. I have some steps to guide you. So identify the problem is really the crux of it, right? Then thereafter, you can, when you identify the problem, the problem identification would come with these various key components, right? How frequently that problem occur, how bad it is, right? What impact does it have on financial, individual finances or public finances, right? And where, the five W's means the where, the what, the why, right? And so on. And the H is the how does it happen, right? And by doing so, you would have done number three, you would have defined the problem and the scope. That means how widespread it is. So maybe you want to find prevalence rate. Let's say you say the problem is Alzheimer's disease or dementia. So you can say one in how many people have dementia by 2030, by 2050, by 2100, how many people will have dementia, and so on. That will define the problem in terms of its scope. Right? Dementia is restricted to only people of what age group, living in where, doing what kind of demographics, and so on. Profile. Let's say your identified problem is dementia. So I think we can stop there just for today. But of course, if you can do all five, that'll be good. Identify potential causes. You may have to look into literature. That means e-library to find articles, on fore, and then think up stakeholders, organizations, agencies, authorities, people, groups, segment, population, right, that may contribute or may be beneficiaries of the policy. So let's stick to 1 to 3. The focus is on 1. 2 and 3 really helps to elaborate on number 1, but the focus really is on 1 because the previous slide is, the instruction is define a public health problem that is caused or aggravated by ageism in Singapore. So now we are 2:53. Let's give all of us maybe 10 minutes to do that in your teams. 1 to 3. Right, go ahead. I'll have each of you present 1 minute later on. Just each team, one person. wrap up. Try to at least answer question 1 and 2 in your group. Okay, let's reconvene. How should we do this? Let's see. Which are the teams that has less than 5 people? So okay, 3 here, 4. Who are the other two? Oh, okay, all right. And here, who is the other? The rest all have 5. Why? Yes. Sure. So, okay, let's have the teams with fewest people go first. Yeah. Because well, more brains means you might have considered more things, and so yeah, so you may be at advantage, I think. So fewest people would be 3 here and 3 here, right? Okay, team number 2. The other 3-person team would be team number 9. Okay, let's have you guys go first then followed by team 9. Okay, go ahead. So the rest, please keep quiet. This is a large room, so you need to be really quiet to hear them. I won't pass them. Maybe I can pass them. No, I won't pass them the mic because then transferring, sharing of mics are going to lead to problems, saliva, and all that. So just stand up and just speak up as you can. And everybody, please keep quiet. Okay. Okay. Make sure the people at the right corner can hear you. Sure. Yeah, thank you. So this team number 2 define the problem as depression. Well, I would say more specifically, it can be called old age depression or depression among older people, older adults. Yep, and then you have various stakeholders. You have answered the 5 Ws and 1 H, right? And you address scope by finding information on prevalence. Thank you. Well done. That is team number 2. All right, next team number 9. Go ahead. Yeah. Just make sure everyone can hear you. I think you need to speak louder. I think the people there couldn't hear. Thank you. Group 9. Wow, this team actually kind of defined a problem in a quite stark manner because it says cardiac problems, which means you might die from, right? Cardiac arrest means your heart stop. Okay, oh, very long. Okay. Okay. Sure. Well, yeah, yeah. So, okay, point taken. So, ageism, right, causes social isolation via the widespread or proliferation of digital technology use, right, or the lack of it eh, by older adults. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well done. Yep. Sometimes it is necessary, as Team 9 pointed out, to actually paint a longer term view, although the focus is always on the near term, because what to do, what needs to be done, the so-called the fixes or the policy solution or programs or services that needs to be that should be implemented will try to kind of address current right issues. But yep, if left unaddressed, it will degenerate. A problem will degenerate. Other things will get aggregated, and then downward spiral. Yep. Thank you. Okay, 4 people group. How about that one at the door? Then followed by this group with Mei Hui. Yep. 4 people group. Yep. Yep. Okay, go ahead. Thank you. So this team 9, sorry, 3, team 3 cancer, OH cancer, caused by ageism, right? Because older people hold a self-exclusionary thinking. All right. Well, let me ask everybody this question. Just do a show of hands here, right? Using cancer as a case study. So you two choose one. You either raise your hand for one or two, right? So you essentially, I'm going to ask you this question: would you choose chemotherapy that prolongs, let's say, 3 years of your last phase of life, or would you choose 3 more months to live? So with chemotherapy, lose appetite, hair loss, blah, 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 3 more years. Or without chemotherapy, live not with cancer and go through your various pains and symptoms, including bloating, stomach, fluids loss, bleeding non-stop, various things, and then 3 months to live. Okay, hands up, first option. None. Okay, hands up, second option. Second option. Okay, thank you very much. Hands up, cannot decide. Cannot decide. I let my children decide for me. I let other people, let the doctors or whoever. Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Despite me, I think I just demonstrated one point here. I asked for 2 options. You guys gave me a third option, which is often the case in that people face in their families with older people, right? They are faced with 2 options, but somehow because no decision, no advanced care planning is made, right? I'm introducing a new term here, ACP, advanced care planning, which we'll talk about in informal caregiving lecture. So often the third option, which is what I think a third of us in this class chose, inevitably happens, inevitably becomes the default, you can say personal policy, not public, but personal policy. Right? Okay, thank you. And this group. Yes, please. Right, thank you. I agree the various causes, social isolation and so on. Your identified problem is depression, right? And then you can say, you even said depression might lead to suicide in its worst case, which is true, right? It is a symptom. So OH depression, the other group also said OH depression, but you kind of talk about it a bit differently in terms of causes. I just want to understand, how is ageism kind of involved here? I mean, maybe I didn't catch that part. Yeah. Thank you. So actually, it's a perpetuating factor, an aggravation factor. I mean, depression started and then it makes it worse, right? So for you, ageism, and the way it makes it worse is to impact the older person's individual cognitions, self-beliefs, attitudes about one's own illnesses and situations, right? Which is similar to group 9, group 3, team 3, right? That the ageism impacts a person's own thinking. Right. Thank you very much. At least these two teams has given another perspective that, which is what I said earlier in the slides on critical gerontology, that ageism could really be observed from both the interpretation or interpretivism, right? What do you call that, perspective, as well as the positivism, right? So both interact. So this is exactly what these two teams have at least tried to describe, right? In interpretivism, right? How other people perceive the older person's situation actually makes the older person change his or her own attitudes, beliefs, thinking, right, to accept these negative uh, societal stereotypes on his or her own individual situations. Okay, thank you. And okay, we are left with the other groups. Okay, who wants to go? Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Depression, okay. Okay, louder a bit. I think that they may not be able to hear you. Okay. Mhm. 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 That's right. Mhm. That's right. That's right. Yep. Right. Thank you. Thank you. I like it that you went more in depth into the how ageism changed the cognitions of the thinking, right, of these older people. You also identified stakeholders, right, and their perspectives on old age depression. Thank you. Okay, is there any other group that identified depression, old age depression? Maybe at least three groups have done so. If there's any other group, then we can kind of have them go first, and then we can talk all about depression. No, okay, all right. Then next group. Okay, any other group? Come on, 3:25. Sooner we finish, the sooner we go back. Yep. Okay, Anissa. Okay. Yep. Yep. Go ahead. Right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Social isolation, right, is the problem you identified. And there are two ways, kind of, sometimes we try to educate the public or educate people who are not knowledgeable about old age issues, right? That the old age issue is very severe. One way is we cite prevalence. That means in the population, how many percent? One in how many? Right? One in three, one in five, right? Another way is what this group did is to actually cite specific case or cases, right? You cited one case in which the neighbor found the lone senior person pass on, right? Neighbor, right? I suppose, and say that one case and make the point that look, one case is bad enough, one case is severe enough, right? So actually, there are two ways. I mean, there are largely speaking two ways. These are not the only ways to say how bad a problem is, but these are two ways. Often we often use policymakers often use to kind of define the problem. Okay, thank you. Another group. Any other group? Yes, 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 yes. Okay, go ahead. Arthritis, rheumatism. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Sure. Louder. Right. Right. Thank you. That's all right. Okay, thank you. I think this group brought up one point that kind of additional, in addition to what other groups brought up, the economic impact on the workforce. So arthritis, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, right, removes people from the workforce. Right. Actually, if you think about it, many of these other problems you defined here, like depression, social isolation, may actually also remove people from the workforce. And when people are removed from the workforce or labor force, right, it becomes a widespread. Right. It is economic impact is there. Right. Thank you. Next group, I think we have one or two more. Which other group? Is it this group? Okay. Mhm. Right. Yeah, we have shown that in class. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Mhm. So is it two problems you identify or one? Okay. Could you or could anyone in your group label that one main thing, that one underlying conceptual problem that links these two? Whose autonomy? The older person, not the physician, not the caregiver. Okay, loss of autonomy. Thank you very much. Clearly, in healthcare, ageism plays a big part, right, to this. Thank you very much. And I think we have one more. Is it which group? This group, okay, and that group, right? Okay, okay. This group first, and then finding that group. Okay. All right. Fours, four down. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. louder.
Oh, sorry. Like, we also thought of similar point as previous group about the loss of autonomy. So, in some sense, like the adult children, right? They have experienced like a reverse helicopter parent scenario in which they have the preconceived notion that their elderly parents are probably like more fragile or they can't think for themselves. So, to ensure like nothing bad happens to their elderly parents, I think they restrict their certain activities, like they don't let them go out of the house or they allow them to do like um, normal routines such as bathing by themselves or cooking in fear of them further injuring themselves. So this kind of lead to like a negative spiral because
Mm-hmm.
it's like if they don't engage in these daily activities, they don't exercise their physical or mental abilities, which may lead them to further weakening such abilities, which also kind of reinforce the adult children's notion that the parents are really not that active
Mm-hmm.
mentally and physically. So
Mm-hmm.
um, that's one thing. And also, like previous group mentioned about the fact that like that senior parents like because of the loss of autonomy, they may want to like do opposite of what the adult children wants is the best for them, just to show that they still have that autonomy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, they kind of like they spite their children and end up like making things worse for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's how AG comes into play.
Okay. So ageism causes falling, and surrounding that many other issues, including fear of falling or anxiety issues. Right. Thank you. Yes, indeed. Okay, we move to the last group. Elderly abuse. Could you speak louder, please? Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Indeed, elder abuse is one understudied area, and critical gerontology does include it does include this topic in its in one of the key research areas. So let me just sum up by this activity by saying this. I'm glad that I think all the groups are duly understood what ageism is, in fact, you duly understood why a need, how ageism can work both ways to the individual, to the society, and how they interact, and then you clearly understood how ageism could actually give rise to a myriad of social, health, economic problems, and probably even beyond, right? So either in terms of its cause or as its aggravating factor. So in your assignment, obviously it will not be on ageism. Right? It will not be on yeah, it won't be on ageism, right? Yeah, but certainly I will define the assignment and write a document on how what topic you should tackle, right, in your CA4 and CA5 very shortly. I think in this coming week it should be available, and so do look out for it on the course site. You would notice that I don't always upload something on the course site and then say, look, I uploaded this. I download something and upload it. Yeah, you realize I don't do that. I just don't like to be a broken record, right? So I leave it to your own autonomy and your own initiative to check, as often as you would like to, right? I think that's about it. Today's lecture gives you the context as well as the steps in doing, in appreciating the need for public policy and in actually carrying out at least the first few steps of policy analysis. Okay, with that, I thank you. See you next week online.